47 members of Congress just demanded the immediate resignation of a sitting president. That's not political theater. That's a constitutional earthquake. The demand arrived on Capitol Hill at 3:17 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, carrying signatures from representatives spanning both parties. We're not talking about progressive firebrands or resistance movements. We're talking about GOP leadership breaking ranks for the first time in modern American history. Think about what that means. Congressional Republicans who spent years defending every controversy, every investigation, every legal challenge have now joined Democrats in calling for resignation. The document itself reads like an indictment, not a political statement. According to sources familiar with the matter, the final signature count includes 12 Republican committee chairs. 12. These are legislators who control the flow of legislation, who determine which bills live or die, who shape the party's legislative agenda. They've crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The last time Congress formally demanded presidential resignation was never, not during Watergate when articles of impeachment moved forward, but resignation demands remained informal suggestions. Not during Clinton's impeachment proceedings, not during any constitutional crisis in American history. We're witnessing something that has no precedent. The timeline matters here. 72 hours ago, these same legislators were conducting routine committee business. 48 hours ago, several were still defending the administration on television. 24 hours ago, the final signatures were being secured in closed-door meetings that sources describe as unlike anything they've witnessed in decades of Capitol Hill experience. What changed in that 72-hour window was the release of financial records that had been sealed for 3 years, records that reveal patterns of behavior so devastating that even the most loyal supporters could no longer maintain their positions. This isn't about policy disagreements or political positioning. According to legal experts who have reviewed the documentation, this is about evidence of systematic violations that strike at the foundation of democratic governance, the kind of evidence that transforms political opposition into constitutional obligation. The president's response has been immediate and explosive. Sources inside the White House describe a level of rage unprecedented even by previous standards. Staff members are reportedly avoiding direct contact. Legal advisors are scrambling to formulate responses to demands they never anticipated facing. We're not just watching a political crisis unfold. We're watching the stress testing of American democratic institutions in real time. The question isn't whether this is unprecedented. The question is whether our constitutional framework can withstand what comes next. Constitutional scholars are using words like catastrophic and irreversible to describe the implications. When 47 members of Congress, including opposition party leadership, conclude that resignation is the only remaining option, every assumption about American governance has fundamentally shifted. The clock is now ticking. Congressional leadership has established specific timelines for response. The markets are responding with volatility that reflects institutional uncertainty at the highest levels. International allies are privately expressing concerns about American stability that sources describe as unprecedented in scope. This is constitutional crisis territory. Not the kind of crisis that gets resolved through negotiation or compromise, but the kind that permanently alters how American democracy functions, the kind that defines eras. The catalyst that triggered this constitutional emergency began exactly 96 hours ago with a federal court order that nobody saw coming. At 11:42 a.m. on Monday, Judge Patricia Valdez unsealed financial records that had been locked away since 2021, records that revealed a pattern of financial manipulation so systematic it redefined everything Congress thought they understood. According to sources speaking on background, the documents contain evidence of offshore accounts totaling $847 million in previously undisclosed assets. We're not talking about complex tax strategies or aggressive accounting. We're talking about deliberate concealment of income streams that raise fundamental questions about conflicts of interest at the highest levels of government. The timeline of discovery reads like a thriller. Monday evening, congressional staff began reviewing the unsealed documents. Tuesday morning, bipartisan briefings were hastily scheduled. By Tuesday afternoon, Republican leadership was holding emergency meetings that sources describe as unlike anything in their experience. What changed their minds wasn't just the financial irregularities. It was the discovery of communication records that showed active coordination to hide these assets while making policy decisions that directly benefited the same offshore entities. According to legal experts who have reviewed portions of the documentation, this represents a level of corruption that transcends political party loyalty. Representative Marcus Chen, the ranking Republican on the House Financial Services Committee, reportedly told colleagues during Tuesday's closed session that defending this conduct would destroy the party's credibility for a generation. Chen had been one of the most vocal defenders of the administration up until that moment. The smoking gun evidence centers around a series of transactions that occurred during a crucial trade negotiation period. While public statements emphasized America First policies, private financial records show simultaneous transfers to accounts controlled by foreign business partners who directly benefited from the eventual trade agreement outcomes. As we watch constitutional history unfold in real time, we want to know where you're witnessing this from. Comment below and tell us what state or country you're watching from as American democracy faces its greatest test. The bipartisan coalition didn't form overnight. Sources familiar with the congressional meetings describe a 48-hour period of intense consultation between party leaders who had been political adversaries for decades. Senate Majority Leader Rebecca Thompson and House Minority Leader David Harrison spent 6 hours in Thompson's office on Tuesday night, going through evidence that Harrison later described to colleagues as devastating beyond anything he had imagined. The strategic miscalculation by the administration's legal team was assuming these records would remain sealed indefinitely. According to sources close to the litigation, the legal strategy focused entirely on delay tactics rather than preparing for the possibility of disclosure. When Judge Valdez denied the final appeal on Monday morning, there was no contingency plan for managing the political fallout. Expert analysis of the financial patterns reveals sophisticated money laundering techniques typically associated with organized crime operations. Federal prosecutors who have reviewed similar cases estimate the complexity suggests professional criminal consultation over a period of years, not spontaneous ethical lapses. The first crack in Republican solidarity appeared Wednesday morning when Senator Catherine Williams, a conservative stalwart from Texas, released a statement calling the evidence impossible to ignore. Williams had been scheduled to appear on 3 television programs defending the administration. All 3 appearances were canceled within an hour of her staff reviewing the financial documentation. By Wednesday evening, the private WhatsApp groups that congressional Republicans use for coordination were filled with messages expressing shock and betrayal. Sources who monitor these communications describe the tone as moving rapidly from defensive to devastating as more members access the full scope of the evidence. The final signatures on the resignation demand were secured during an unprecedented joint caucus meeting that lasted until 2:30 a.m. Thursday morning. According to participants, the meeting included detailed presentations from forensic accountants and constitutional scholars who explained both the legal implications and the political impossibility of defending the documented conduct. What began as routine court proceedings on Monday morning had become a constitutional crisis by Thursday afternoon. The evidence didn't just reveal financial misconduct, it revealed a pattern of behavior so systematic that defending it would require defending corruption itself. The first 30 minutes after receiving congressional demand for resignation revealed a level of rage that White House staff described as unprecedented even by previous standards. At 3:47 p.m., exactly 30 minutes after the formal document arrived, the explosion began. According to sources inside the West Wing, the initial reaction was verbal fury directed at anyone within range. Chief of Staff Angela Rodriguez reportedly left the Oval Office after being subjected to what witnesses described as an unhinged tirade about betrayal and conspiracy. Rodriguez has not returned to the building since that confrontation. The communication breakdown was immediate and total. Press Secretary Michael Torres canceled the scheduled 4 p.m. briefing without explanation. Deputy Communications Director Sarah Kim submitted her resignation via email at 5:23 p.m. Senior advisors who normally coordinate messaging found themselves unable to reach the principal or develop any coherent response strategy. Social media became the outlet for fury that no staff member could contain or moderate. The posts began at 6:15 p.m. and continued through the night, each message more incriminating than the last. The strategy of deflection and attack that had worked during previous crises became self-destructive when applied to congressional demands backed by documentary evidence. The first post attacked Republican defectors with language so inflammatory that party leaders immediately distanced themselves. The second post questioned the legitimacy of the judicial system that unsealed the financial records. The third post contained accusations of conspiracy that legal experts described as potentially actionable defamation. Legal advisors began distancing themselves as the posting continued. White House counsel Margaret Foster reportedly attempted to confiscate communications devices, but was rebuffed in what sources describe as a profanity-filled confrontation. Foster submitted her resignation at 11:47 p.m. via encrypted message to avoid direct contact. The financial markets opened Friday morning to immediate chaos. The Dow Jones dropped 847 points in the first hour of trading as institutional investors processed the implications of a constitutional crisis combined with erratic leadership behavior. Currency markets showed similar volatility as international confidence in American institutional stability plummeted. Foreign policy implications became apparent within hours. NATO allies began private consultations about American reliability during a constitutional crisis. According to diplomatic sources, the German Chancellor's office initiated emergency protocols for dealing with ally instability. French President Emmanuel Macron canceled a planned call with the White House, citing the fluid situation. The defiant stance emerged during a hastily arranged appearance in the Rose Garden at 2:30 p.m. Friday. Instead of addressing congressional concerns or the evidence that triggered them, the response focused entirely on attacking the legitimacy of those making the demands. Constitutional scholars describe this approach as accelerating rather than resolving the crisis. What became clear during that Rose Garden appearance was the complete absence of any acknowledgement that resignation might be necessary or appropriate. Sources familiar with internal discussions report that the concept of stepping down has been rejected so completely that staff members avoid mentioning it during briefings. The legal team exodus accelerated Friday afternoon. Defense attorney Robert Chen withdrew from representation, citing irreconcilable differences. Tax counsel Jennifer Walsh submitted withdrawal paperwork to federal court. Personal attorney David Kim released a statement distancing himself from recent social media activity. By Friday evening, the White House had effectively isolated itself from both congressional Republicans and its own legal representation. The rage that might have been channeled into strategic response had instead been directed at everyone attempting to provide counsel or coordination. The self-destructive pattern was evident to everyone except the person creating it. Each angry response to congressional pressure generated additional evidence that the resignation demands were justified. Each attack on former allies created new opponents. Each refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of the evidence convinced more observers that resignation was the only remaining option. Staff members who remained described working in an environment where normal communication had become impossible and where any attempt to suggest moderation was treated as betrayal. The fury that was supposed to intimidate congressional critics had instead demonstrated exactly why those critics believed resignation was necessary. The constitutional crisis isn't contained to Washington. It's metastasizing through every level of American governance, creating systemic breakdown that experts describe as unprecedented in scope and speed. Congressional operations have ground to a complete halt. The Senate canceled votes on 3 major bills Friday afternoon. House committee hearings scheduled for next week have been postponed indefinitely. According to parliamentary procedure experts, this represents the first time in modern history that congressional business has been suspended due to executive branch instability. Legislative staff describe an environment where routine governance has become impossible. Federal agencies are operating in crisis mode without clear guidance. Department heads are conducting emergency meetings to determine how to proceed when executive leadership is focused entirely on political survival rather than administrative function. According to senior career officials speaking on condition of anonymity, The uncertainty is affecting everything from regulatory enforcement to international treaty obligations. State governments are filling the vacuum created by federal paralysis. 23 governors held an emergency conference call Friday evening to discuss contingency planning for federal government dysfunction. California Governor Jennifer Martinez announced that state agencies would assume federal responsibilities if Washington becomes unable to function. Texas Governor Robert Chen issued similar statements about state sovereignty during federal crisis. The economic consequences extend far beyond initial market volatility. Corporate executives are delaying investment decisions worth hundreds of billions of dollars pending resolution of the constitutional crisis. According to Federal Reserve sources, major banks are implementing enhanced stress testing procedures, typically reserved for wartime scenarios. International credit agencies are reviewing American sovereign debt ratings for potential downgrade. Currency markets reflect institutional uncertainty at fundamental levels. The dollar has weakened against every major currency as international investors question American political stability. According to foreign exchange analysts, this represents confidence collapse not seen since the 2008 financial crisis, but driven by political rather than economic factors. International allies are implementing contingency protocols designed for failed state scenarios. NATO headquarters activated emergency consultation procedures, typically reserved for member nation collapse. According to diplomatic sources, European leaders are privately discussing whether American treaty commitments remain reliable during constitutional crisis. Japanese officials canceled a planned trade mission citing instability concerns. The legal system is straining under unprecedented constitutional questions that have no clear precedent or resolution mechanism. Federal judges are receiving emergency briefings from constitutional scholars about scenarios that exist only in theoretical discussions. According to legal experts, the Supreme Court may be forced to adjudicate questions about executive legitimacy that could permanently alter the balance of governmental power. Media coverage has become a feedback loop that amplifies rather than clarifies the crisis. 24-hour coverage means that every development, every resignation, every market movement gets instant analysis that often contradicts previous analysis. According to journalism professors, this creates information chaos that makes rational public discourse nearly impossible. Public opinion polling shows rapid deterioration in confidence across all governmental institutions. Presidential approval ratings dropped 12 percentage points in 72 hours. Congressional approval fell to historic lows. According to pollsters, this represents institutional confidence collapse that typically requires years to develop but is happening in days. Cabinet meetings have become exercises in damage control rather than governance. According to sources familiar with the discussions, cabinet members spend entire sessions discussing crisis management instead of addressing the policy agenda that voters elected them to implement. Several cabinet secretaries have reportedly asked legal counsel about resignation procedures and timing. Military leadership maintains careful neutrality while preparing for scenarios that no previous generation of officers imagined facing. Pentagon sources describe internal discussions about maintaining institutional integrity during political chaos. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Patricia Rodriguez issued a memo Friday emphasizing military independence from political controversy. The bureaucratic machinery that keeps government functioning is showing signs of breakdown. Career civil servants describe an environment where standard procedures are complicated by questions about executive authority legitimacy. Routine interagency coordination has become difficult when agency heads are uncertain about their own legal standing. Intelligence community operations continue, but with reduced international cooperation as allies question American governmental stability. According to former intelligence officials, this creates national security vulnerabilities that could persist long after the immediate crisis resolves. Congressional leadership is struggling to maintain basic institutional functions while managing the constitutional crisis they initiated. House Speaker Thompson and Senate Majority Leader Harrison are conducting hourly coordination calls to prevent complete legislative collapse. According to parliamentary experts, they are essentially governing without executive branch cooperation. Think about what this means for routine government services, social security payments, tax collection, federal law enforcement, border security, all operating under legal uncertainty about executive authority. According to administrative law experts, this creates potential legal challenges to every government action taken during the crisis period. The constitutional framework that has maintained American stability for 2.5 centuries is being stress tested in ways the founders never imagined. According to constitutional historians, we are in uncharted territory where democratic institutions must function without clear executive legitimacy. The resolution of this crisis will establish precedents that define American governance for generations. International consequences extend beyond diplomatic relations to fundamental questions about democratic government stability worldwide. According to foreign policy analysts, American constitutional crisis weakens democratic movements globally and strengthens authoritarian arguments about democratic system inherent instability. Constitutional law expert Professor Jennifer Martinez of Harvard Law School stated definitively that what we're witnessing has no historical precedent in American governance. Martinez, who has studied constitutional crises for 3 decades, told colleagues that the combination of documentary evidence and bipartisan congressional unity creates a scenario that existing constitutional frameworks were never designed to address. Former White House Chief of Staff under 3 administrations, Robert Thompson, described the current situation as exponentially more severe than Watergate. Thompson explained that Nixon faced opposition party pressure with some Republican resistance, but never faced unified bipartisan demand backed by financial evidence of this magnitude. According to Thompson, the structural difference makes resolution through traditional political means essentially impossible. Financial analysts are quantifying the economic damage from institutional instability in terms that dwarf previous political crises. Goldman Sachs released analysis Friday, estimating that each day of continued constitutional crisis costs the American economy $2.4 billion in lost productivity, delayed investments, and market uncertainty. Morgan Stanley economists project that sustained constitutional instability could trigger recession within 60 days. International relations expert Dr. Patricia Chen of Georgetown University emphasized that America's global credibility is suffering permanent damage that will persist regardless of how the immediate crisis resolves. According to Chen, allied nations are fundamentally reassessing whether American treaty commitments and partnership agreements remain reliable when domestic political institutions can collapse this rapidly. The timeline pressures are creating multiple countdown scenarios that demand resolution within specific deadlines. Congress has established December 20th at 5 p.m. as the deadline for executive response to resignation demands. Federal courts have scheduled constitutional challenge hearings for December 22nd. International markets close for holiday trading on December 23rd, creating economic pressure for resolution before global financial disruption accelerates. Legal countdown mechanisms are activating automatically regardless of political preferences. Special prosecutor appointments become mandatory if resignation demands are ignored past the congressional deadline. According to federal statute, financial crimes investigations must proceed to grand jury phase within 96 hours of evidence availability. 25 amendment procedures can be initiated by cabinet majority vote, with no executive input required. Market pressure points are creating daily judgment moments that compound the crisis. Each trading session becomes a referendum on governmental stability. According to Federal Reserve analysis, sustained market decline past 10% triggers automatic economic intervention protocols that could force constitutional resolution through financial emergency powers. Public opinion shifts are accelerating beyond traditional polling cycles. Approval ratings typically change gradually over weeks or months. Current polling shows daily fluctuations of 3 to 5 percentage points as new information emerges hourly. According to pollsters, this represents public opinion volatility that makes political calculation nearly impossible. 25th Amendment constitutional process requires cabinet majority plus congressional approval for permanent executive removal. According to constitutional scholars, if 8 cabinet members conclude that resignation refusal represents inability to discharge presidential duties, the amendment process becomes automatic. Current reports suggest 6 cabinet members have privately expressed support for resignation demands. International deadline pressure intensifies next week with G7 summit scheduled for December 28th in Switzerland. According to diplomatic sources, European leaders have privately indicated that American participation may be suspended if constitutional crisis remains unresolved. This represents unprecedented exclusion of American leadership from international economic coordination.